Welcome to Connecting to Admired Leadership, where twice a month we explore the behaviors and routines that make great leaders extraordinary. I'm Wes Bender, and I have the distinct pleasure of hosting some of our firm's partners, coaches, and clients to discuss leadership in ways you won't hear anywhere else. Let's dive into this episode and make people and situations better together. All right. We have folks dropping in from our waiting room. I was telling Sierra we had a good number of folks just sitting, waiting on this. And so I'm sure it has to do with you, Sierra, and having you as our first guest or first time on our session today. But welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We know we'll have some folks over the next minute or so who drop in. Welcome to Connecting to Admired Leadership. I want to first take the opportunity, one of our best practices within our firm is to express appreciation. So I want to say a special thanks to our friend and colleague Mallory Stacy, who facilitated our last webinar. If you did not listen, I highly recommend. She interviewed one of our partners, Ben Stringfellow. Sophie is on with us. I'm going to ask her to just drop in where you can find the recordings for these webinars on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. While she does that, I'll also take a quick moment to shout out Sophie. If we were sophisticated enough or formal enough on these sessions and these recordings to have a producer for the show, it would be Sophie. And Sophie does just a fabulous job of dropping resources in the chat box. And she's also wonderful behind the scenes, just talking through and making these more value add as we go along. So thank you, Sophie. We would love everyone. Drop your name and where you're from in the chat box. We love to know who's attending live throughout our time. As always, we will utilize the chat box for Q&A throughout our time, as well as networking opportunities. You may see some folks from the same area along the way, but we'd also encourage folks behind the scenes to drop additional value adds, insights, resources that come along here too. So thank you for being here. Today, I am beside myself with excitement. We've got Sierra Holland, who is a managing director in our strategic communications practice. Many of you know we have three practices within our firm. Leadership practice, which is what most of our conversation is around on these sessions. We also have a talent practice, helping folks recruit, retain, develop incredible talent. And then we have a strategic communications practice, which is incredible and has some pretty phenomenal folks on it, like Sierra. So Sierra mainly works in our strategic communications place, but we have a great saying, and that is communication is leadership and leadership is communication. So some of the things we'll be chatting about today will certainly relate. So just to kick off, Sierra, could you just tell us, who are you? What do you love about what you do?
Mm. My name's Sierra Holland. I'm obviously in the strategic communication practice. What I love about what I do is getting to help leaders become better communicators for their teams. So many of the challenges that leaders come to us with can be solved through communication. Having to deliver a certain amount of feedback, wanting to create more engagement around a certain idea or a certain initiative. And we can help create what's the right experience to communicate that? Not just what are the words that you're going to use, what's the email that you're going to send, but how can you as a leader show up in that moment to get the results that you're looking for? So I love getting to advise around that and create those types of, coaching relationships where we can parse those ideas together and figure out what's the best way to go about it.
That you've probably already seen, those of you who are joining us today. The more Sierra talks about communication, the more passion will begin bubbling out of her for sure. But just to kind of set the stage a little bit more, because Sierra, this is your first time with us. My first experience with Sierra was interviewing. She was interviewing our excellent speakers during our firm meetings. This was 3 years ago. When I first experienced Sierra. And honestly, I don't remember the excellent speakers that we have, but I do remember what a great facilitator Sierra was in navigating all of those kind of things. Second experience I had was not only that she was a great facilitator, but she's wicked sharp, smart, and her curiosity radar is off the charts. So she's constantly learning and developing and meeting people. Then, if that was not enough, Sierra and I had the opportunity to attend our ALI Utah event together. And what did I learn? Sierra is not only a great facilitator, she's a smart advisor, but she is a ton of fun at the end of the day. So you package all that together, and she becomes a real high value to a lot of our clients, and a lot of fun to work with as well. So when Sierra came to me and said, Wes, if the opportunity arises on one of our monthly webinars that you're leading, I'd love to join and discuss clarity, specifically its impact on decision making and engagement, and possibly highlighting our Clarity Index, which is a pretty phenomenal tool that we use a lot at our firm. And my response, of course, was yes, please. That sounds fantastic. So I'm going to ask Sophie to drop in the chat box our field note that we sent out ahead of time. Again, if you're not a Field Note subscriber, would love for you to subscribe to Field Notes and get those daily pieces of leadership wisdom that we have out. So, and then all that to say, Sierra, welcome. Thanks for all the value you add to our firm, to our clients, and please frame this topic up for us. Why is this a topic important to leaders? Why are you so passionate about it as well? And give us clarity around the topic of clarity.
I knew you were going to do that at some point, and I was looking forward to it. So, I mean, you flattered me a lot, Wes. I've learned a lot about facilitating from you as well, but let's get right into it. So, I am part of our communication practice, and I felt like with the Clarity Index, we have learned something for communicators that leaders need to know. Who here, myself included, has been leading a team meeting and we shared a new idea? Maybe it was a strategy, maybe it was an initiative, a decision that was made, an expectation of the team. We felt we were clear, we delivered it. We had the proper expectations, proper words. We delivered it exactly as we planned. But come to find 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, maybe our team didn't hear it at all. And we know that that's not good, but there's a real cost to it from a research standpoint. When we are not clear, we are losing out on employee engagement and decision-making effectiveness. So the Clarity Index, a measurement tool that we developed for senior communicators, helped us identify what are the 5 topics that leaders need to communicate with some regularity, some cadence, and some level of specificity and nuance to actually drive that employee engagement and drive decision-making effectiveness. And those 5 topics are strategy, culture, functional strategy, role, and then employee value proposition. So why would someone work here versus someplace else? And it's pretty intuitive. If somebody doesn't have clarity on those 5 topics, what happens? If someone's not clear on the strategy, they don't know how to prioritize their work. They don't know where they should be focusing their time versus what they should be saying no to or deprioritizing. If someone's not clear on the culture and the norms and expectations of how to interact, sometimes they show up in the wrong way with the wrong tone, with the wrong interaction that puts people off from wanting to work with them. If people aren't clear on why they should work here versus someplace else, they're more likely to be on the job hunt and shift jobs. We might lose those high performers in those moments. So when high performing teams and their high performing leaders get this right, what they're doing, communicating about these 5 topics with some level of regularity, cadence, and nuance, they see more employee engagement and more consistent and faster decision making as a result. So I felt like, why are we sitting on this information just for communicators? Because at the end of the day, it's how communicators and leaders work together to drive those outcomes together.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, can you tell us, and this is the part, Sierra, that always makes my guests a nervous wreck, because then I pivot because I think of something that we did not
That's
talk
fine.
right earlier. But how does that play out with our clients? Meaning, you said so much really quickly in regards to the clarity
Mm,
index and the different parts and that kind of stuff. I think a lot of leaders, especially high level leaders, they are thinking, well, I do speak with clarity. I do communicate with clarity. I do that.
mm,
How do we walk in and really help people even get better at that? And as you formulate, what that looks like with our clients and how we navigate getting people to communicate more clearly and better so it does drive that decision making engagement that you're talking about, which I think we would all agree to. When we look at communications, when we look at leadership, when we look at talent development across the board, we're not looking at the broad principles. We're looking at the
Mm.
small little tweaks that make a huge, huge difference. We often have people on these webinars who are newer to our approach and to what we do, but we treat a lot of what we do like you're learning to play tennis. If you have a coach that says hit the ball harder, it's not super helpful. But if you have a coach that says tweak your hands just a little, and it will allow you to hit the ball harder, right? So, what I want you to get after is a little bit of that. Move your hands
Mhm.
just a little bit, and you'll be that
Mhm.
much more clear. How does that play out with our clients?
Yeah. And so I want to be conscious of, we could look at it from an organizational level, or we could look at it at an individual team leader level. I want to focus more on the team leader level, but let me speak for a moment on the organizational level. When we're working with clients, often we're saying, what's the frequency and cadence with which we're touching on these topics throughout the year? So it might be looking at all of your major town halls. Are you covering those with enough depth, enough real detail that people can latch onto? And I'll give an example of that in a second. But that same rule really applies for team leaders. If you're a team leader, think about all of the team-based meetings you have with your direct team throughout the year. How often are you really just focusing on, here's the work we have to get done, who's going to work on it, who's prioritized in this way, what are your barriers, which those conversations need to happen. But are you also connecting things back to the strategy overall? So it's not just, do we have a strategy message, or do we have a strategy that we're communicating? I find a lot of organizations communicate the strategy in January or March, but then they're not coming back to it throughout the year. So, how can you, as a team leader, every time that you're making a change, making a decision, communicating about something new with your team, connect it back to your strategy? I have an example of this where I was working with, a local government that wanted to adopt a new billing system. And they were really excited about it. They had created a whole campaign about, like, here's our billing system, it's going to do all these great things. But they were missing a key piece. How was it connected to their strategy? Well, their strategy said, become a local government that people look forward to interacting with. Simple frame to talk about that billing system with both their employees and their citizens that they served. They could say, there's going to be a new way of billing, but it's going to be a lot simpler, smoother, faster. You're not going to have to interact with the person. There's a great website that you can go to, and we'll walk you through it the whole way. Are you connecting that back to, here's what we are after and what we're all about? Not just saying, let's do this billing system because it makes sense. Even if people can connect those dots, it's better and stronger, and you'll have more uptake if you're able to connect it back to your strategy that you set in January or March. So that's just one example.
That's awesome. And that's one thing I've seen you and others do that is very different than any other organization that I've ever worked in or been a part of. And that is, you almost needed to pause for groans when you said government billing system. That just sounds mind-numbing in a lot of ways to begin with. But using that as a potential example there, a lot of people say, a lot of people sell the new strategy, right? They're saying
Mm.
this is going to be great, this is going to be the outcomes of what this is, but there's a very different piece to, again, looking at the details of what that really looks like on a daily basis.
And I even want to take that and sort of flip it in the opposite, because often people think, okay, let's communicate the strategy and we'll talk about, here's our pillar and the initiatives and how they work, but they miss a step. They forget that people are going to look at your strategy and think about everything else that exists in the environment. Are those symbols, actions, and decisions aligned to this new strategy? I once was working with an organization that came out with this really big departure from the way that they had worked before, a new organizational structure, so that they could work faster, a new expectation that people are working in smaller teams faster to be more nimble. But they weren't looking at key points that people could point to and say, well, that's not going to let us be faster, and that's not going to allow us to be more nimble. A big one was their legal and regulatory processes. I know, again, not the most interesting topic itself, but if we say that we really care about working faster and more efficiently, have we looked at all of the systems, tools, and processes from our old strategy that could hinder or could cloud our new strategy, so that our strategy can only be clear if there aren't detractors from it, and you have to proactively look and try to find them. Where could people read into dissent? Where are the skeptics in the room going to roll their eyes and say, sure, now we care about AI? But when they don't have those AI trainings available to them, when the tools that they have access to are subpar, do we really care about AI, or are we just hopping on a trend?
Yeah, that's so good. This is off the subject. Everyone knows I constantly take a lot of our practices and our best practices and a lot of the content of what we do. And by the way, certainly happy to take questions. If there's something that you heard from Sierra that you want her to dive a little bit further into, feel free to drop that in the chat box. But a lot of the things we always say is all of our content should work in the professional environment for sure, but it also carries over into our personal lives as well. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of us, but my son is in transition. It's his senior year of high school, so we're looking at colleges, and my wife and I know what we want to express to him, but we're constantly sitting down and having a conversation ahead of time of how that's going to land and exactly how we would communicate that. And I know that's a little far off, but the practices of that, thinking through those type of things, and then determining what the frequency and cadence and what that needs to look like, it plays itself out and is so important. And it doesn't take a lot of extra time, correct? I mean, a lot of people will say, I don't have time to do all this. I'm telling my people what they need. If they take it, great. If they don't, then they're at a loss and we'll move on. But it does it just takes almost like a rhythm, almost like a new culture of getting into that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say it often comes down to the planning right before. Sure, we don't all want to spend hours planning, and I'm not talking about hours planning, but how can you think through what is the one thing I want people to take away from this?
Mhm.
It's a very simple question you need to ask yourself before important communications, because often we think that main message is really clear, but it's muddled with all these other ones. Maybe somebody heard something that they've actually been worried about, and now they're spiraling, they're thinking. I know how fast I'm talking right now, and I can imagine I'm even trying to moderate myself of what is the most important message that people take away. Um, I want every leader to think about that before important communications. I want you to think about that before you talk to your son about whatever it is. But when you were talking, something that I think translates really well between what leaders can do and what you can do outside of work as well is, I mean, it's the conditions of accountability. So
Yeah.
how clear are the expectations that I'm setting? Have I, if I told my team member, I want you to create a work plan for this project, have I set a clear expectation of what format it should be in, if there's a format I want it to be in? Have I set an expectation of how detailed, what level of detail is too much? What kinds of columns I want to see? What level of detail in the timing do I want? The literal time of day certain things are going to be done, or is it okay to have it at the week level or the day level? How clear really are the expectations I'm setting out at the jump? Then two, another condition for accountability is resources. Have I, as a leader, provided the right resources for this person to be set up for success and really create something at a high level on their first try? Do I have a sense of what excellence looks like, and have I prepared them with a template? Have I showed them this is what excellence looks like? Pay attention to this part. Don't pay attention to that part. Have I given them, a specific template with the right colors and the branding that it should look like, so that when they get started, they're able to move more quickly? And another condition of accountability that people don't pay as much attention to is, where am I giving them autonomy and choice to help shape the output to? So in those first two examples, it's me saying, here's what I need, here are my expectations of it. But then I need to give them leeway on exactly how they create it. Maybe I give them leeway in what format would make the most sense to you. Maybe I get them to actually set the deadlines with which they complete the task. So, conditions of accountability, when you're talking with your son too, I imagine there are elements there that you could work into that conversation of, when do you expect certain things to be done by, with what level of care and with what level of detail. I think these are all important aspects. And then the final condition for accountability is, are there clearly defined positive and negative consequences to complying or not complying. So do people
Yeah.
understand if I do this, I get this. If I don't do this, here's the consequence. So I think about clarity often through the lens of the conditions of accountability. After all, if we want to drive results, we have to be clear in a lot of those different areas.
I love that. So I want to pull a couple key things of what you've said for everybody in regards to clarity. If you want more engagement and if you want better decisions from your team, clarity is absolutely a way to get after that.
Mhm.
Frequency, cadence is one thing you've said. Looking at those 5 points that you said of the clarity index as well. And then the last piece you said there was uh, really moving away from, well, I shouldn't have to do that. I shouldn't have to
Mhm.
tell them the format and all they should know those things. As leaders, we really need to move away from saying that or believing that. I I shouldn't have to do that, for them. Whether you should or not, do you want higher engagement and do you want better decisions from your team? And if so, doesn't take a lot more time to really get serious about being clear with that. Does that strike kind of what you've said so far?
It does. And because, you can say, I shouldn't have to do all of that. But at the same time, I'm often hearing, I wish I didn't have to be as involved as I am. And what I'm saying is do a little bit more of that work up front to create clarity for better results the first time.
Yeah.
So to me, seems like an investment well worth it rather than we all know the very great pain of going back and forth on slide decks or really intricate details of an Excel spreadsheet. No one wants to spend time doing that. If you do a little bit more work up front, you'll have better results. And that includes, thinking about your next team meeting. How are you preparing in advance to make sure people get your main message? I saw in the chat somebody had asked for the 5 points again. And I can cover them because there was another point I wanted to bring up around cultural clarity and an interesting insight there. So the 5 topics to communicate about in your team meetings, strategy, culture, your functions strategy, role clarity, as well as why it's better to work here versus someplace else. But on that point around cultural clarity, in the Clarity Index, we found that people's scores for culture tend to be the lowest. Despite having clear values stated on a website somewhere, sometimes even, described in a little bit more depth. Um, and the reason why cultural clarity tends to come in lower is that culture itself is intangible. Often we have principles, maybe we have values, it's a word, excellence, service, trust, safety. These are all nice platitudes. But for people to really understand the culture, which is norms by which we should all behave, behaviors we should be enacting every day as we go about our work, we have to get to much more detail. And what people overlook are all the opportunities to tie your cultural values and cultural behaviors you're looking for into things that you're already communicating about. When someone gets promoted, that is a great opportunity for you to say, well, Sally got promoted because she demonstrates excellence in everything that she does. Whether it's writing an email to a client or it's leading a meeting, I see excellence in every piece of it. No line in that email is wasted. No words are left unsaid in the meeting. She really knows how to have an excellent dialogue, an excellent conversation that gets us the information that we need. How often are we actually tying promotions and new hires to our cultural values so people can see and connect the dots? Same thing with what are the expectations and norms of how we interact with each other? It doesn't have to be way overly produced or anything, but if we say we value relationships, what does that look like when we're interacting in the office? Do we have an expectation that everyone check in with each other before they head out for the day and say, hey, is there anything I can do to help you before I head out? That says you care about relationships in a way that is louder and more demonstrative through your actions than a definition on a website can ever do. So, how are you using your team meetings and your interactions to either prioritize and lift up one of your values or say, well, that's actually not in line with our values? A decision that might be put on the table, a question that might be asked of, would we ever do this? And if you know the answer is no, are you explaining it either through, well, it actually contradicts our strategy, or does it contradict our values? at the end of the day, people aren't just going to take your words at face value. That's the whole point I was making at the beginning, that message sent is rarely message received because people are looking at your actions and how you interact and the different decisions in their environment to see what's really true here. So that was the point I wanted to make around cultural clarity.
Sierra, you are living up to the. I want another hour of chat with you, and I'm sure others do too.
I'll always take
You
it.
The and just to get back to another hour, please. You got some folks saying that as well in the chat box. So a couple things real quick, and then I'm going to prep you for the last question. We did have a question
Okay.
come in the chat box, but I'm actually that's Leanne. We're actually going to move over. I'm going to use one of the pre-submitted questions that came in ahead of time that I think will get at Leanne's question too. So I'm going to
Okay.
prep you with that, say a couple things, and then let you speak to it. But this question that came in says, "I'm a very detailed in my communication. When do you know to lessen it or keep it detailed? How do leaders find the
Hmm.
right level of specificity for different audiences and situations?" Which I think a lot of us, really work to balance with. So, as you gather what you're gonna, the thoughts you have around that, a couple things. Mikey did put in the chat box that we dumped this transcription into our AI executive leadership coach, Alex. And Alex will develop a summary of this and send out to all the registrants as well. You also have my email address, so if you ever need to reach out or any specific things you'd love to know. And then also, as a added benefit to everybody who attends live, you can book a 10-minute quick session. Sierra will be the first one to jump on those 10-minute calls. So if you wanted to speak a little more specifically about any specific circumstance or your petition, your personal kind of struggle or tension as it relates to driving clarity with your teams, you can do that. Sophie will drop that link in the chat box as well right now. So, Sierra, yeah, how do you know how to be detailed? How do you know to balance that? How do you know to lessen it or
Yeah.
keep it more broad?
There are two pieces of advice. So I'll say one, when you're speaking with senior leaders, they want one thing from you. They want you to, or maybe three things. They want you to be brief, be brilliant, and be gone.
All right, say
So
say it
anytime
one
you're,
say it one more time. Say it one more
okay,
time because that is one of the most incredible recommendations that we could possibly give as it relates to clarity.
the biggest mistake I see leaders and team members make when they're in front of senior leaders is being too detailed because what they want is for you to be brief, be brilliant, and be gone.
Hmm.
So before you head into those conversations, do you really know the one or two things you need to say? And can you let some of that extraneous detail out of your message or your presentation or your conversation? If they want to know more, they'll ask. So how can you almost, strip away as much as possible and still make the points that you need to make? That should really be the lens you're looking at when you're with senior leaders. But then when you're with your team, I would encourage you to mix up the format. So is it something that you need to say directly in a meeting, or could you give detailed, resource materials, a follow-up email? Not everything has to be said in the meeting, and not everything has to be shared over email. There can be a split between. So I would think through, even, is there a pre-read I want people to engage with before the conversation? Then here's what I need to say in the conversation that's distinct from what I've already said. Then finally, here's the follow-on of here's where you need to take the actions that you need to take. I think Smart Brevity is a great book that anyone who's looking to be more brief should look into. I personally, prefer Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. They really taught me how to be core and compact with my core messages. But Smart Brevity is a more recent one on being more concise in your communication and saying just what you need to say and nothing more. So I would recommend that for anybody looking to learn more too.
That's fantastic. I'm going to give you just kind of final thoughts, Sierra, encouragement for those leaders who are on live and those who might be listening to the recording. I do want to let everyone know we actually have a new opportunity within our firm called the Relationship Short Course. So it's taking some of our key relationship behaviors, best practices, and actually putting a peer group together to go through a short course and dive into those. There's a lot of connection between building real good relationships with those we lead, with clients that we have, potential clients that we have, and also the ability to drive clarity with that too in some ways. So just one that I thought would be great to highlight. Sophie has dropped that, a little more information about that, and would love for you to check that out or pass that along to any leaders as well. All right, final minute, 60 seconds. Sierra, what encouragement do you have for all of our incredible community of leaders out there?
Yeah. Um, my big piece is just think through to your next team meeting. What topic are you not talking about enough that you should talk about a little bit more if you want to see stronger, more engaged employees and faster, more consistent decisions at all levels? That would be my final thought, other than just to say thanks, Wes, for having me. I loved it. I could have probably talked for much longer with you. So appreciate the time, and thanks everyone for joining.
Absolutely. We got to one of the 62 questions that we had that came in ahead of time. So we'll leave the chat box open for a bit if you want to grab any of those links that Sophie dropped in. Sierra, thank you as well for all that you do and for our firm and our clients as well. Everybody have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you at the next one. Cheers.
Thanks, Wes. Thanks, Sophie.
Bye.